Hey, welcome back. It's Don again, and we're continuing on with the CJ-5 project here. So today's the day we're going to tear into this front end. So I think I mentioned the last time you saw me that I couldn't deal with my shocks looking nasty. They were really pretty new in terms of mileage. They hadn't been used hardly at all, but they'd been sitting on the Jeep for 18 years. So there were a little spots of rust here and there. So I've sanded them all down. I've got them drying over here. They've got some fresh white paint on them. I took the boots up in the house and cleaned those off with just some soap and water. And I'm gonna move the Jeep over out where I've got plenty of room to get around the front end and see if we can't get this front Dana 30 put back together today, or at least mostly put back together. I think I have everything I need except I think I mentioned one of the little gears that slides back and forth inside of one of the hubs is missing the springs that make it go back and forth. Now I may be able to put it together now to get everything buttoned back up and then just pull that hub again when I get replacement parts for that. But other than that, I think I have everything I need. We'll know in a little while. Once I get into it, that's usually when I discover I missed something. But let's tear into this and see what we can get done today. Okay, well, it's been 12 days since I painted these, and the paint is just barely finally dry. I'm kidding. All right, so anyway, it's been a couple days since I did paint these. I've got my grease fittings down in here. I think I mentioned these are the ones that I need to do a little needle greaser with. I went and bought one of those, so I'll show you that. And I'm just gonna clean the paint off this a little bit. I did get a little bit of paint on these tapered shafts here. I'll clean that off, we'll sand it off a little bit. And then, you know, this is gonna go back in, up from the bottom like that. And this piece right here was that piece that I was all confused on earlier, but this threads down into the hole right here to pre-tension this top part. So I've got that to go back in. I'll figure these out, how much I need to torque this up to or how tight that needs to be. While I have this out, I'm gonna go ahead and put some grease in there now because these will be easy to get to. I haven't really greased any of the rest of my greasable stuff because I'm not too worried about getting to it right now. But these will be much easier to grease while they're off the Jeep than when they're on the Jeep. So I'm gonna grab that little greaser thing and that little needle greaser, throw it on my grease gun, put some grease in there, and then we'll start to put this back together. All right, well, let's do a little grease gun 101 here. So this is your standard greaser end, and this is the little needle end. So this one you actually put over the end of the greaser, like if I'm putting it on there, it presses onto it. This one is what I'm gonna use to squirt the grease up inside of that little cup type dispenser thing. So I'm going to swap that out and grease these up, and we'll be ready to put them on. All right, well, at this point, if you think that I don't know what the heck I'm talking about, I'm right there with you. So let me just explain what just transpired. So I went and got my little needle fitting to go in here, and I'm getting old, you know. When I look down in there, I see a little ball at the end of that, but it's apparently not a ball. It's where it's just the machining stuff that's left over, because I've tried pushing it with a screwdriver. I tried my little needle bushing thing or needle greaser, would not go in there, just shooting the grease back out at me. Now, in my own defense, the thing is drilled out, but it apparently is a cap, which I thought in the first place. So I thought it was a cap. I thought I needed to go get grease zerks. Then I convinced myself it was not a cap. I went and got a needle greaser. Then I tried to grease it, and I convinced myself yet again it's a cap. So I did go get some zerks, So I've got a grease zerk in there and one in there now. And what I put in there was these little M6 by 1.0 straight grease fittings. So they had those down at the auto parts store, $6 for a package of 10 of them. So not a huge deal, just once again, thought I knew what I was talking about, but that'll teach me. So I'm gonna grease this up over on the bench where it's easy to get to, and then I'll come back and we'll start to put it in here. Okay, so as we start to reassemble this thing, basically just gonna take the threaded ends of our ball joints, bring them up from the bottom, and then I'm gonna take that nut that threads onto the bottom ball joint. And obviously you do have to pay attention to which side is up on that nut, because there are some divots kind of pinged into that thing that make it basically a lock nut once you get it on there. And then I went and got my split pre-tensioner, and I'm going to put a little anti-seize on that as it threads into that top knuckle and thread it down in there. Now I did make the mistake of threading that thing way down in. I wouldn't do that necessarily. In fact, you may not even need it at this point until you really start to get the tension on your bottom ball joint. So we'll do that for a second, and then I'll come back and talk some more about that. Okay, so now we're just basically about at the point where we're going to go after that bottom nut with our big wrench. That's 1 1/8 inch, and I've just got a big 1 1/8 inch box end wrench here that I think was kind of the easiest to get this thing rolling. However, what I found was as I started to hit the part where that pinged part of the nut was hitting the threads, where it was turning into kind of that lock nut, the ball joint itself started to rotate in the cup down on the bottom, and I couldn't get enough upward pressure on the knuckle to hold that tapered shaft in place. So I messed around with this for a while. What I ultimately wound up doing was I did have to back my pre-tensioner way out so that it was not putting any pressure on that top ball joint. And then I had to put my top ball joint nut on and draw the knuckle up with that so that I could kind of draw that bottom ball joint up into the tapered hole enough to get it to lock in place, so that the tension of that tapered hole was enough to offset the lock nut portion of that thing so I could tighten it all back down. So I struggled with this a little bit, and again, my recommendation would be do not put that pre-tensioner in at this point until you've got your knuckles or your ball joints really starting to kind of seat themselves into the knuckles. So I messed around with this for a while, but I ultimately got it. Yeah, so I did the exact wrong thing here. I backed my top ball joint nut off, and I put that pre-tensioner back in and tightened that thing down a little bit further because, I don't know, in my brain I thought that was going to be the right thing to do. So then I tightened down the top nut again and tried to draw the thing up, and what I was doing was basically pulling that top ball joint up into that pre-tensioner before it had time to travel far enough to bring that bottom bolt up to tighten it up. So that was the wrong thing to do, and I wound up undoing that completely, and by the time I figured that out, now I had some real pressure on that pre-tensioner, and it was a little bit tough to get it out of there. So learn from my mistake. Don't do it in that order. Just leave that pre-tensioner out for now, or very loose. Okay, let's talk torque for a minute. So I did a little digging on the internet and I found a document that was a Jeep manual document, I think, that said that this bottom nut that I'm doing right now there is supposed to torque to 70 foot-pounds. And then that pre-tensioner that's screwed down into the top part of that knuckle up on top gets torqued down to 70 foot-pounds as well. And the very top nut, which I'm actually removing right here so I can get to that pre-tensioner, that guy gets torqued to 100 foot-pounds. So again, 70 on the bottom, 70 on the pre-tensioner, 100 on the top. Now the one thing I'll tell you is when I had torqued the bottom nut to 70 pounds and the pre-tensioner to 70 pounds, when I grabbed the knuckle, it was really hard to move it, and I panicked a little bit and I thought, wow, this just seems like it's way too tight and I'm not going to be able to steer this thing. But trusting the numbers, I went ahead and moved forward, and when I took that big nut that goes on the top, that's the big one with the spots through it where you can put the cotter pin through, and torqued that guy down to 100 pounds, it seemed like that kind of pulled the knuckle up just enough to kind of seat everything properly, and it felt like now kind of a more natural amount of force to move it. Now I know you can measure in foot-pounds the amount of pressure it takes to move the knuckle. I just kind of did it by feel, and it feels natural. So again, this top nut that I'm screwing on right here goes to 100 pounds, and the other two are 70, and when I was all done with that and I got that cotter pin through the top, it seemed like everything seemed nice and normal and good, and so that's where I left it. Well, I struggled a little bit with that bottom ball joint wanting to turn and not tighten up. So it's a Loctite, kind of a locking nut on there. You probably can't see it, but it's got little divots in there to lock it in place. So I got it. What I did is I backed off my pre-tensioner in here, and then I tightened this guy down to pull that bottom ball joint up into the hole better, and that tightened it up. So now I'm going to put my axle shaft back in there. I'm going to show you what we got here though, because there's 3 pieces that go with this axle shaft. So let's see if I can get them back off of here. So this big one is the final seal, and it goes in here with the flat end against the flange, and it goes over that edge right there, over that lip. So I'll put that back on in a second. I'll show you what else I got. So there's another little one here. That goes in last, and it has kind of a little groove in it. So I'm putting the groove towards the outside because this is the seal that's going to sit against the back of the axle shaft, or the spindle there. And then this one's just kind of a spacer, but as I understand it, it goes in with the chamfered side of it towards the U-joint, so it can go on this little beveled edge here. So this goes here. This goes over all the way on there, and I can't really do it with one hand, so I might have to come back and, oh, there we go. Maybe I got it. Okay, so that goes up against there. And then this guy, again, with the groove to me here to the outer edge of the shaft, I'm putting that on last. And then again, that's going to seal up against this shiny face in here. And you can see there's a set of needle bearings inside of there. So I've cleaned that out a little bit, and now I'm going to pack some more grease in there. And then I'll put the axle shaft back in, and then I'll put this guy back on, lock it in place. Okay, so as we all know, cleanliness is always important before you insert the shaft. So I'm going through here and I'm cleaning out each of the splines, because this is going inside of my differential, and I don't want all my, sanding particles and dust and dirt and everything that's been accumulating in the garage in here. So I'm basically just cleaning that spline off really good before I slide the shaft in here. And then as we slide it in there, the one thing I am going to tell you is inside of that axle shaft, way up there near the pumpkin, is where the actual axle shaft seal lives. So you do kind of want to be gentle as you're putting this thing in and support that shaft a little bit, so you're not kind of letting it slide on the bottom of the axle tube where it's going to just slam up against the axle seal as you're putting it in there. So you have to, as you're going in, you have to kind of support the thing, and when you feel that first gentle resistance of it hitting up against that seal, then you kind of stop there and wiggle the shaft around a little bit until you can feel it fit through that seal, and then slide it in gently, and then you'll rotate it just ever so slightly so that your splines line up and you get it hooked back into the inner part of the differential so that it's all tied up nice and neat. All right, well, since we're basically continuing on with the innuendo part of this project, proper lubrication is extremely important. So anyway, I'm just going to put some wheel bearing grease on that little needle bearing arrangement inside of my spline, and it's going to slip over the shaft, properly lubricated, and line those bolts back up, and we'll be ready to start reassembling here for real. Okay, now I will admit at this point I had one of those, oh geez, am I putting everything back in the right order moments? So I ran inside and I watched one of my previous videos from when I took this thing apart just to make sure I was putting everything back together in the right order. All right, well, I went back and checked my video from when I took this all apart, and just to make sure I got the order right. So this spline shaft goes on first. My brake mount goes on second, and this shield here, this cover, goes on last, like that. So that's the order of all that stuff, and luckily I filmed myself taking it all apart, so it's easy to remember how to put it back together. So let that be a lesson. If you are going to rip a Jeep apart and you're not going to get it all done in one weekend, it's not a bad idea to not trust your memory and videotape the thing as you take it apart. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this off for right now. I'm going to leave this on here so that it's a little bit thicker, and I'm just going to take a couple of my bolts and kind of walk this thing back on a little at a time. So I'm just putting a bolt on every other, or excuse me, a nut on every other bolt. There I go again, mixing those two words up. Bottom doesn't want to go on just yet. There we go. So we'll just, a little at a time, just kind of walk this back onto there. I'm going to pause here for a bit. I got the one side done. I'm not sure I know where my seals are for the other side, so I got to do a little digging, and I need a little stool that rolls around to sit my butt on when I'm working on this stuff. And since the next thing is the actual wheel hubs with all the bearings and stuff in there, I've got some brake cleaner that I'm going to use to clean those. I need a bucket, just one of those dirty black, low buckets that I can get that stuff cleaned off in. So probably one more trip down to O'Reilly's down here. I think they'll have that stuff for me. And then I'll come back and see if I can get this side put together. Now I don't have my brake calipers. I'm buying new brake calipers. They're not here yet. I have new discs to put on those hubs. So I think I have to knock out my wheel studs and push them into the other side, so into the hub. But we'll see. I'll tear into that in a minute when I get back from the store. So I'm going to go get that stuff and then I'll come back. All right, well, I confess I did not check in with you after I went to the auto parts store on the weekend. And it's not the weekend anymore, it's Tuesday night, and I'm just checking in to catch up. So everything went okay putting stuff back together up there with, obviously the challenges that I talked about already. But I was getting concerned when I was getting ready to try to put in my passenger side axle shaft. I was missing some of those seals. So I went down to Napa today to see what they would have. And the guy did find me this one little tiny seal, the one that has that little groove in it that goes up against the backside of my spline. So that's cool that I got new ones of those, but I didn't think that was what he was getting me. I thought he was getting me the seals that goes around the bearings. I think I mentioned that I didn't want to put old bearings on the thing, so I did pick up wheel bearings. So basically have new bearings and race for both sides of the hub, the inner and the outer. They're two different sizes. And then while I've got my hubs off of there, I went ahead and did my thing, put a little paint on those. So this is what I did have, this is what the brake disc goes onto. So I did mention that I had to knock out the wheel studs, and these holes are kind of grooved inside of there, and this wheel stud lines up in there. So I will be putting the new disc caliper, or the disc itself, on here with the wheel stud back through it once I get some nice black paint on this, and then I'll clean out the inside and put my new bearings and races inside of there. So that's all pretty much ready to go back together, but I am missing two of those parts of that sealing mechanism that goes on the axle shaft. So I'm going to see if I can track those down, and then I'll be able to put that back together. Now I did get pretty much everything except those seals. Oh, and the seals around the back of the wheel bearing, the actual one that goes like, I think back in here, or possibly this end. Yeah, this end. I think there's a seal that goes in here that holds the bearing inside and keeps all the grease and stuff inside of there, and I don't have that. So that's going to be a problem. The guys at Napa didn't have it. I've got my old beat up ones out here on the bench, so I might measure them to make sure that as I'm hunting around, I get the right thing. So anyway, it's a Tuesday night, and for right now, because as I am editing this, I'm realizing that again it's getting a little lengthy because I spent a little time messing around with that, putting that knuckle back together. It was kind of a hassle. So I'm just gonna wrap this up for now, and when we come back, I'm not gonna show you the other side, putting the axle, knuckle, all that back together, because it's basically the exact same as the side I did show you, just opposite, so no sense being redundant there and doing both of them. But hopefully some of my little lessons will help you from struggling with this as much as I did. I didn't really watch anybody put them back together in as much detail, in enough detail to save me the hassles that I went through. So hopefully I can save someone out there a little bit of trouble. And I have had a couple of folks ask me in the comments for part numbers. So as I start this up again and I get ready to actually get these bearings and these seals and all this in, I'll give you at least, like a Napa part number or whatever number I come up with, so that hopefully when you go to the parts store, you're not just there with some ponytail dude like I am with, who's just looking on his computer, and if he can't figure out how to search for something, he can't find your parts. So that's where we're at. We're going to wrap this up for now. Again, just thanks for hanging with me and watching these things. If you like them, hit the thumbs up button once in a while. Give me a little like out there. That helps. But more importantly, really the most important thing for me that makes me feel like it's worthwhile doing this is just toss me a comment down there and tell me what your thoughts are. Like I said, I've had a fair amount of people ask me about specific part numbers. So I'm going to make an effort to do a better job of getting you the part numbers as I do this. And everything else, like I said at the start of this, when I do something dumb, I'll show you so that hopefully you don't wind up doing the same dumb thing. So until next time, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next go around.